Managing a remote or virtual team across time zones used to be a specialized skill reserved for global corporations. Today, it is a core management competency that the majority of leaders at some point in their career will need to master. And the evidence is clear. Organizations that have figured out how to lead distributed teams effectively are not just surviving, they are outcompeting those still treating remote work as a problem to be managed rather than a capability to be developed. The failure mode for remote and virtual teams is well documented. Communication deteriorates into noise. Accountability becomes ambiguous. High performers lose visibility. Team cohesion erodes into a collection of isolated individuals who happen to share a Slack channel. And motivation, the fuel of voluntary performance, withers without the social reinforcement that physical proximity provides. None of this is inevitable. All of it is a leadership problem with leadership solutions. The first milestone is infrastructure, the operational foundation that makes distributed work effective rather than merely possible. 3 infrastructure elements are non-negotiable. First, communication architecture. Clearly defined norms around which tools are used for what purpose. Asynchronous tools, email, recorded video, documentation platforms for information sharing and non-urgent communication. Synchronous tools, video calls, messaging for decisions, collaboration, and relationship maintenance. Without this distinction, organizations end up with a communication culture that is both always on and never resolved. Second, documentation discipline. Remote teams that rely on unwritten norms and verbal agreements consistently underperform teams with clear written standards for processes, decisions, and expectations. Documentation is the organizational memory that replaces the institutional knowledge that would otherwise travel through hallway conversations. Third, meeting rhythms, a structured cadence of team touchpoints, weekly team sync, regular one-on-ones, periodic all hands, that creates predictability and belonging without overloading the calendar. The second milestone is performance management, recalibrated for remote reality. The single biggest mistake remote managers make is managing activity instead of outcomes. In an office, activity is visible. Working looks like working. Remotely, what is visible is output, and that is actually a better metric. Define outcomes clearly. What does excellent look like for this role in this period? Agree on check-in rhythms that are frequent enough to catch problems early and infrequent enough to avoid micromanaging. Use shared project management tools, not as surveillance, but as transparency infrastructure that lets everyone see the status of work without requiring a meeting to find out. And address performance issues promptly. Remote environments make it easy to avoid uncomfortable conversations. That avoidance compounds into much larger problems over time. The third milestone is managing across time zones specifically, because this is where distributed teams most commonly fail. There are 3 strategies that high-performing global teams use. First, rotating the pain. If your team spans multiple time zones, rotate the inconvenient meeting time, rather than defaulting to the time zone of headquarters or the most senior person. This signals equity and prevents a 2-tier culture where some team members are always the ones joining at 6 a.m. or 10 p.m. Second, maximizing asynchronous collaboration. Design workflows so that progress does not require real-time coordination for every step. Handoff documents, recorded video briefings, and asynchronous decision-making protocols let work continue across time zones rather than waiting for the overlap window. Third, investing in cultural intelligence. Teams that span geographies also span cultures. Communication norms around directness, disagreement, hierarchy, and time vary significantly. Managers who take time to understand these cultural dynamics build trust across difference. Those who impose a single cultural frame consistently fail to unlock the diverse perspectives that global teams uniquely offer. Now, for the trap that derails even well-structured remote teams. It is the proximity bias, the unconscious tendency to give more visibility, more opportunity, and more positive performance assessment to the people managers see most often. Research from Stanford's remote work study, Harvard Business Review analysis, and numerous other sources confirms this pattern. Out of sight, out of consideration. Remote employees receive fewer promotions, are included in fewer high-profile projects, and report lower engagement. The antidote is intentional inclusion. deliberately ensuring that remote team members have equal access to visibility, feedback, and developmental opportunities. Proximity must not be a career advantage. Remote and virtual teams, led well, have demonstrated something that skeptics consistently underestimated. They can outperform co-located teams on knowledge work. They attract talent from a wider pool, and they build resilience by default, since distributed operations are inherently less vulnerable to location-specific disruptions. The capability is real. The leadership question is whether the manager in charge is willing to build the disciplines that unlock it. Your go-to: assess your current remote team against the 3 infrastructure elements: communication architecture, documentation discipline, and meeting rhythms. Identify which one is weakest and schedule a dedicated conversation with your team about improving it. Not a survey, a conversation. If you are building remote team effectiveness, you will also need the toolkit on motivating employees through recognition, development, and purpose. And that connects directly to the video on mentoring and engagement in this series. Go there next. The research on psychological distance in remote teams deserves specific attention because it explains a phenomenon that confuses many remote managers. Why performance and engagement can seem adequate on paper but feel fragile in reality. Psychological distance is the sense of separation, not just physical, but cognitive and relational, that remote workers experience from their teams and organizations. Researchers at Indiana University and Stanford have documented that psychological distance reduces team cohesion, lowers collaboration spontaneity, and diminishes the sense of organizational identity that contributes to discretionary effort. 3 practices specifically address psychological distance in virtual teams. First, visible leadership presence. Remote leaders who make themselves regularly visible through brief video updates, participation in team channels, and genuine interest in team members' lives beyond work tasks reduce psychological distance more than any tool or process change. The technology enables connection. The leader's visible presence creates it. Second, virtual social infrastructure. Intentional, informal social interactions, virtual coffee conversations, team-based non-work channels, recognition practices that celebrate personal as well as professional milestones. Build the relational texture that co-located teams develop naturally. Remote teams need to engineer what proximity creates automatically. Third, shared experience design. Giving the team shared challenges, shared projects, and shared wins creates the collective memory that bonds teams. The remote team that has delivered something difficult together has a social glue that no amount of virtual social events can fully replicate. Global team management also requires genuine cultural humility, the willingness to acknowledge that practices that feel natural to the manager may be culturally specific rather than universally appropriate. Meeting dynamics, feedback styles, decision-making protocols, and communication directness norms vary significantly across cultures. And the manager who treats their own cultural defaults as the professional standard is perpetually creating misunderstandings that are attributed to performance rather than to the cultural translation gap they actually represent. Thanks for watching. If you found this useful, hit like and subscribe to our channel for more practical insights. And if you're ready to go further, check out the next video on your screen.